Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, thank you very much. Thank you for everything you do in this province for education. I think although we at the present time may face challenges with respect to budgets, let us not forget that we are still a province that, quite frankly, leads the world in public education. Alberta ranks amongst the best in the world in public education, and I think, quite frankly, not enough Albertans know this point. Minister, I'm going to ask a couple of questions just relating to budgetary issues, specifically around Calgary. From there, I would like to divulge into some bigger picture sort of items around education as a whole. So the first question I have is, I believe that there is a nearly 50% decline in funding in something that is, I guess, a cost of purchasing adjustment. And I believe that funding was at some point or another provided to deal with inflationary problems in some school jurisdictions. So nearly $6 million is reduced in this area. My question is, being that we don't currently live in those inflationary times, what's the need for a cost of purchasing adjustment anyways?
Well, that's a good question. When we looked at the fact that we needed to find some ways to be more fiscally prudent with respect to our budget, we looked at the various grants and said, are they performing the targeted grants? Are they doing what they were intended to do? Relative cost of purchasing was brought in a number of years ago in an attempt to recognize that there were differential costs around the province. Some places were higher cost places to operate than others. When we looked at this, it became apparent to me that our relative cost of purchase analysis was focusing on what might be called market basket measures with respect to living. And most school boards spend most of their money on salaries. And so if there's a differential cost between school boards, most of that is in their salary grid. And it's not what's measured by the relative cost of purchasing. And so to adjust the budgets based on relative cost of purchasing adjustment, which measures a market basket measure of the price of coffee and other things like that, price of housing, isn't really an accurate reflection of the differential costs, if there are any, among school districts. Now, having said that, there's a northern allowance which reflects that northern constituencies above the, I forget what's parallel, but have some extra costs due to their distance, and there's a Fort McMurray living allowance adjustment. But the relative cost of purchase, which actually for Calgary was a $6 million adjustment, and you have to say, well, why would Calgary Board of Education get an extra $6 million on that when the bulk of their costs are really grid related? And in fact, one of their other cost pressures is the $10 million in grid movement this year, which means that their cost of teachers has actually gone down because their older teachers have retired and they've got a lot of new teachers on the front end of the grid. So in that theory, their cost of professionals, one might argue, and I don't know the facts on this, is that they actually have a lower cost because one of the cost pressures they have is grid movement. If they had higher end teachers, older teachers, they wouldn't have a grid movement cost, but they'd have the higher cost teachers. So the relative cost of purchasing, to my mind, didn't accomplish what it was intended to set out, and actually did differential funding for school boards on an unfair basis.
Well, in that case, Minister, I mean, you reduced it by 50%. Why not eliminate that completely and reinstate the class size initiative for grade 4 to 6? I think the class size initiative is something that we as Albertans shall be very proud of. It's something that shows our commitment to public education and excellence in public education, not just satisfactory public education, but absolute excellence in public education. So instead of a cost purchasing adjustment, put that money into the class size. Let's bump that up.
Well, Yes, and what we did was we're taking that, but because it's such a significant adjustment, we didn't want to get rid of it all in 1 year. So we're taking it out in 2 years. So that money will disappear next year unless some change happens, but my anticipation is that money will disappear next year. What we've done on class sizes is maintain the amount of money, just change the way we distribute the money. So it's actually the overall class size initiative budget has gone up because we've put an increased amount in for growth, and but then we just realigned the funds to deal with the areas where we anticipate there will be year-over-year growth pressures at the K-3 level for now, and where the data shows it does the most good. Now, one could argue, well, put more money into the class size initiative. One could argue, put more money into the per student per capita grant. But the relative cost of purchasing grant, when we looked at the targeted grants, the 6 that we dealt with, other than AC, the others, there's all a strong rationale for saying they're not accomplishing what they were set out to do. And if we say to school boards, and as you analyze your budget, look for value gains, look for, are you doing something that makes sense? In each of those cases, I can say those grants aren't accomplishing what they were set out to do. Doesn't mean that we might not have to look at some other way of doing that. And on that, I would look at the enhanced ESL, for example, to say we still have some issues relative to certain sectors of immigrant populations coming into the system. But what we know is that the enhanced ESL grant wasn't really attacking that problem, which is what it was set up to do.
Minister, what levers do you have as minister to minimize the effects of Budget 2011 on students in the classroom? So what levers do you have to target reductions in specific areas that do not affect students in the classroom?
Virtually none. There's no magic wand. Most of our budget goes out to school boards. School boards, most of their budget goes to salaries. If there's a net reduction or a small increase in their budget and it's not sufficient to meet the increase that's required under the contract, it will impact in certain ways. So school boards, we have to prevail upon school boards to be open and accountable to their publics, and then to be able to justify every area of their spending, and ask them to focus on making sure that the highest priority is supporting student learning. Now, you can justify supporting student learning in a number of different ways, and I think that should be open to a school board to say, we need to have this particular group of consultants, for example, to do this, because that's going to enhance student learning. That's the contract between them and the parents in their area and their community. Once we provide them with the money, it's inappropriate for me to tell them how to allocate those dollars. There's very little funding that's in the budget that goes to a school board which they have to use precisely for the reason which it was given. So whether it's an ESL grant or an Aboriginal student grant or any other grant, it's a way of allocating resources to recognize the demographics, but they get to make the judgment call in terms of how to allocate those budgets in the best interest of their students.
So I get from that that we provide funding to school boards in defined categories. However, the way they spend those dollars is completely up to them. The categories that we allocate money in is not necessarily the way that those dollars are spent at a local level. And I see a nod.
Yeah, that's correct. Other than the class size initiative, which they have to demonstrate is going to class size, and the AC funding, which they have to justify in terms of what they're doing in AC. But even that, there's a lot of capacity to do various things. We don't tell them what to do, but they have to show how it's going to their applied research, their AC program. But other than that, and capital dollars, IMR dollars, and those sorts of things, it's a funding model which tries to recognize the complexities of the demographics, not one which we audit against to say, are you using all the dollars in any specific area?
Do we, in fact, have an administration cap or a headquarters spending cap? Do we have a limit on what any particular school jurisdiction is allowed to spend on administration costs or headquarter costs?
Not specifically headquarter costs, but the guidelines for urban boards is 4% on administration, and for rural boards up to 6% on administration, recognizing that there may be exceptional costs that they incur due to distance or travel or those sorts of pieces. But there's two areas within that. What are the two areas? Yeah. So within that, there's two essential areas. That one is administrative building purposes and those sorts of things. Another is the types of support resources that can be charged to administration.